Welcome to the Hard Won Wisdom Podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Come here weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network.
Hi, I'm Fawn Germer.
Michelle Brigman.
And I'm Carla Dodds, Marketing Executive at Walmart.
And this is the Hard Won Wisdom Podcast. Today, we're going to talk to Carla about not only her job and what she has learned the hard way in the corporate world, but what she has learned that has made her a major voice for diversity there at Walmart and in her industry. She's got quite a story to share, so welcome, Carla.
Thank you, Fawn and Michelle. It's great to be here with you guys today, especially to talk about such a great topic I love so much.
Well, fantastic. So let's just start with those defining moments that made you realize that this was going to be your passion and where you would find your voice.
Well, I think it's from birth, really, because I'm originally from Argentina. And Argentina, for those of you that don't know, is a society that doesn't have a lot of diversity. At least it wasn't that way when I was a child. And so, however, my family was very traveled and had the opportunity to be in different cultures, learn different languages. So for our household, it was very embracing of other diversities in culture. So, I think just from growing up in an environment like that, that was definitely a defining moment for me. And then just coming to the United States at the age of 7, I moved to San Antonio, Texas. And back then, it's interesting because there wasn't a lot of Latinos in San Antonio, Texas, believe it or not. Today, it's majority Latino population. And it was interesting because I didn't speak a lick of English at all. I didn't even know how to say hello. So to me, it was a completely foreign environment. And I felt like I was on my own as an only child at that point. And so the defining moment, too, was going to school, where my teacher didn't even know how to communicate with me. And I had just had surgery on my leg, and my mom had to tell her how to say, "Don't run, no corriendo." And it was very, with an accent. So as a little girl, I was looking at her going, what is she saying to me? I didn't even understand, And so at that point, for me, it was very clear that I needed to put effort into understanding others and understanding them to help bridge that gap between different cultures and languages. So at a very early stage, as obviously life progresses, you come across different experiences. And then, in I think it was going into middle school, at one point, someone found out I was Hispanic, because with the name Carla Dodds, it doesn't really sound you're Hispanic, according to the majority, but it's those biases that we create, just from life and humanity, unfortunately. And so someone found out I was Hispanic, and I guess I did something that they didn't like. So the only thing they could hang on to was they told me, why don't you go back to your country? And I looked at them and I said, okay, I will. I'll go visit my family. That was my response, going into my school days. And then at a different point that week, somebody came up and said, you're a wetback. And that felt so wrong. And that was definitely one of those pivot moments where you're like, what does that even mean? And it happened in a second and I reacted in a second. So my response was like, yes, I guess I am a wetback when I swim. And yes, I know how to swim. Thank you very much. But no, I didn't swim across the river to get here. I came from Argentina. You should look at a map. It's a long way to go. So, it was the responses that you come across as a defense mechanism, but also it gave me a sense of realization that it's unfortunate people have such ignorance. And I think at an early age, I realized some of the biases are ignorance and some of the biases are hatred, which obviously is a derivative of ignorance sometimes. And I felt like, I have a voice and I've always been very blessed in my family to stand up for myself. But unfortunately, I looked around and there's a lot of people that don't speak up. And there's a lot of people that don't know how to react to those type of circumstances. And I think not only was it from a point of, differentiation of where I was from, but I realized that at that point in time that it was my purpose was here to really help others in finding their voice and helping others develop themselves. So it was much broader than just diversity and inclusion, even though that's where it came from. So for me, I'm always very thankful for those earlier years that set me on my path. And then, of course, because of my passion to learn from others and understand the psychology that might lead them to that type of behavior and not understanding, I put an extra effort into understanding others. And so even today, when I go into a position, I try to understand, hey, Fawn, where are you from? Michelle, where are you from? What was your childhood like? And it's not just about where people are from a geographical location or a distinction in culture, but those life experiences, right, that have instilled certain things in us.
Oh, it's interesting when you were faced with that moment of just meanness, ignorance, to use your word, that you didn't feel like an anger or resentment toward that? Because what I heard you say after that was really about leaning into being curious and understanding from the other person's point of view, how they saw you and how to really break down that particular assumption. Or
yeah, I think it was curiosity set in. All of us have defense mechanisms. For me at that point in time, it was definitely not anger. I think it was more sadness, if I have to tap into it. Sadness that they didn't understand, and sadness even for me that I didn't understand what they were talking about.
Yeah.
Carla, you acknowledge that you're whiter than milk. And so they don't automatically assume that you're Latina. So I wonder where they got that need to say those things. And then also, does it make it easier for you to make the case because you are whiter than milk?
I think it does, quite frankly. And I've experienced that in corporate America. I've been in situations where I've had fellow colleagues that are Latinas or Latinos that, they may look more the part or have a name that's more in the stereotype bucket of Latino. And it's interesting, or they may have an accent, because that's the other one that blows people away. I don't have an accent because I came here in an early age. And also in my family, we learned languages. So even when I speak Portuguese, I don't have an accent. So, but when there's another, fellow Latina or Latino, and they're making the same point, and they might have an accent or look more the part, it's interesting because it is more difficult for those that are non-Latinos to assimilate with me than it is with them, just because there is no accent or I may look more like. And again, it's more about these unconscious biases that you find that, in a way, we look for people and to identify with others, right? So maybe it's because they're women or not, or what are the points of similarity? And it's unfortunate that we do that. But it is something that I feel has been instilled in generations. I think now we're seeing a little bit more of breaking away from it. And, as the saying goes, you can't judge a book by its cover. Like, you're speaking to me right now, you're seeing me, and I am 100% Latina, but you wouldn't be able to tell that. So, I speak Spanish at home with my son, with my mom, with all my family. Every chance I get, if I go into a restaurant and I hear that they're speaking Spanish, I will speak to them in their language. I don't hide the fact that I'm Latina. As a matter of fact, I think if you look on my LinkedIn, I say it quite a few times. And so, if anything, Michelle, to your point, like, it made me prouder of who I am and where I come from at that moment. It made me sad for that split second that they didn't understand and they didn't have the opportunity to know what it means to be Latina. But it's nothing I've ever hidden. On the contrary.
Have you had a situation where you've had to just really confront it and put in an awkward situation where you've had to, whether it's sexism as a woman, or if it's a Latina woman, where you've really had to be a loud voice because you saw something happening in your corporate environment? Or
Yes, I think more so on the female piece of it. Absolutely. And again, I think, in 1994, I had the privilege of working in Latin America for the first time. Even though I am from Latin America, I had done all my schooling in the US, went back to Argentina, and I was working at Walmart in the receiving area of where we get all the shipments. And it wasn't towards me per se, but I had a team of 21 girls. I was responsible for the demos or the sampling inside the stores at that point. And the young ladies that were working there were from underprivileged areas of Argentina. It was in many cases their first job ever, and probably, they didn't have a lot of opportunities for other jobs. And so this young lady was coming in through the receiving end, and all the trucks were waiting to get in. And one of the men was yelling things at her. And so I was appalled, because having been raised in the United States for the large majority of my life, I was like, what is that? I had not seen that in the business place yet at that young age. And I was just infuriated that, here is this young lady, because she's a woman, coming into work, and she's being accosted by the driver of, some merchandising being delivered. So, I was probably like 21. I don't even remember. Definitely my early 20s. I went out there with my clipboard and I said, "Excuse me, sir, I need your name and I need your information, and I need you to turn your truck back around and get out of this lot." And he looked at me like I was crazy, because you can't see me on camera, but I'm a whole 5'1". And I think I weighed like 90 pounds at the time. But I was determined that this girl was going to be protected, and that she shouldn't have to suffer consequences for being a female coming into work any different than anybody else. And so he told me, of course, I was crazy. And, I've come to terms with that type of definition of myself for a very long time. So I don't care. I knew I was doing the right thing. I told the girl, you don't ever have to tolerate things like that, and you shouldn't. You're coming to work. This is a safe haven. And just because you're a woman, they shouldn't be treating you any differently. Fortunately, the company I was working for at Walmart very much believes in that type of support and diversity, and making sure that everyone has a safe place. And, I had to run it up to the head of merchandising for soft drinks, and then go all the way up to the president and let him know what I did. And I said, I don't have a problem, because I know what the company policy is. I know what the right thing is, and she should not have to endure that. So I think, that was definitely one instance where I had to have probably a louder voice.
Did the guy back the truck up and go?
He did. Yes. And let's just say it was a major soft drink. And so I did get a lot of calls, but every time I had the conversation and said, look, she was being accosted verbally coming in, and that's not okay. And just
your Thelma and Louise moment with the truck driver.
I mean, Fawn, you don't know me, but I was willing to get in the truck and pull it back out myself, even though I had never driven the truck, because I was like, so this is crazy. I'm like in a twilight zone here.
Was he disciplined by his company?
I'm sure he was, because we did get an apology call.
That's excellent. Chalk one up. That's.
Well, I think there's so many of these microaggressions that are happening still in the workplace, unfortunately. And a lot of it's uncomfortable, right, to stand up and say something. Because I mean, you were pretty aggressive in terms of knowing and standing firm in what you believed and standing behind the corporate policy. And fortunately, you had the support of your organization behind you. But I think that's not always the case. So, Carla, what advice do you give to women today who are dealing with microaggressions and are afraid to actually speak up?
What's a microaggression?
That's where they're like the little subtle discriminatory or exclusive behaviors where you've got some bias that's showing up. So it's not necessarily intentional, but it leaves another person feeling excluded, discounted, not valued. Just subtle.
Well, and then also, what about people dealing with overt aggressions too?
About just really the courage to speak up, because yes, you're quite confident. And I mean, ever since I've known you, right? So, but give some thoughts around what other people can do.
Well, I love that you say I'm confident, because sometimes I feel like I'm not confident. I don't really think about it. But anyway, going back to others, it's very personal because everybody is different, to your point, right? So some people have more fear than others. My general advice, and given that I'm not a therapist, take it or leave it, but it's about finding your authentic voice, right? So for me, I have always been given a voice as a child early on. And so for those that might not feel as comfortable speaking up, it's really finding how can they say something, knowing their audience, knowing where they're at, and building that awareness around themselves to really get the point across. And so, I've been in instances where, okay, at that point I was young, so there was less fear, right? Because you have that just sense of I'm out to conquer the world and I can do this and nothing's going to stop me, no truck driver or otherwise. But, when you get older and you are in corporate environments that might be more structured and more stuffy in some cases, you can't just go out there and say, excuse me, Mr. CEO, give me your name. I need you to pull it back out, and pull back out of this lot and let's start over here. So you have to find a way of how you're going to effectively communicate what you want to communicate and what is right and what is wrong. It also stems of where every individual's values are, right? So my values for myself have been very clear. I think, others are still trying to figure out what their values are, or maybe they don't have them as prominent in their life. So that's why it's important to find your authentic voice throughout the journey and finding out how you can express what you're trying to express and it be received in a way that it sinks in.
I think it's equally as important to make sure you're carefully choosing your battles so you don't get that troublemaker label and they actually hear you. So how do you do that?
Well, I'm of the mindset of I don't speak unless I really have to. First of all, when I go into an environment that I don't know folks, I tend to be more quiet at first until I get my bearings and understand a little bit more of my audience. And then when I feel comfortable enough, I'll go ahead and speak up. And then it's also putting it in terms that they understand, right? Because even sometimes I don't understand and I'm okay asking the question, but there's others, especially I've noticed in my own culture, Latino culture, that they don't feel comfortable asking the questions because they're scared of judgment. I don't have that. Like, I'm not as scared of judgment, I would say. Like, I've come to terms that I'm going to do the best I can, put my heart in it 100%. And what other people do with it, that's their world, their issues, their judgment. I am putting my best intent. And so I can truly speak that I get up every morning with the intent of helping others and helping others in their development, in finding their voice, in making a difference in this world for humanity to be a better place to live. Yes, I work at an amazing corporation that allows me to do that.
But this is really a tricky thing because, going back to my own fights for better coverage of women and minorities in newspapers, seems like that is such a clear and obvious right thing to do. And yet that almost killed my career because I got the troublemaker label. And one of my side mentors was an African-American woman who was just so potent in my life. And one of the things she said to me is keep your politics out of your work. And I learned what happened when my politics came in my work because it was threatening. It was threatening to say the status quo is not good enough. If you are going to continue to fight the cause of saying we want equal treatment of women, minorities, Latinos, of everybody, right? The diversity fight, even if it is the company's mission, if you are constantly sounding the call, you risk the label that can then turn you into being the complainer, the whiner, the never satisfied, the troublemaker. So you have to choose those battles. And how do you know when something is important enough? And how do you make yourself heard so they actually hear the content instead of the threat?
Okay, so I mean, I completely agree with you on the troublemaker label. I've come to terms that if that's what you need to label me, and I know this is a different perspective and it's not for everybody, I'm okay with the troublemaker if I know that I'm doing the right thing, but that's a personal journey. I wouldn't ever tell someone, you go ahead and take that troublemaker label and go forth.
But hang on. See, and I'm not afraid to have a troublemaker label either. But when that label then causes you to either be demoted, pushed aside, or suffer because of it, you lose your effectiveness with it. And what I'm asking is, how do we make the choices to do this so that we can be effective and make change? And it's not about not being a badass. We know we're badasses, but how are we effective in making change and shaking the status quo, which likes itself being the status quo?
Well, for me, I think I know that I'm not in it alone. So I would say that you don't have to take on that troublemaker 100%. It's more about finding who are your allies and who share the same values as you so that you're more in numbers, right? And so ironically enough, I am also part of the Latinx ARG, which is the Associate Resource Group. And our awareness piece is actually, we said the campaign is Together Somos Más. So together we are more. So to that point, it's about how do you bring others to the table that might or may not be willing to speak up, but they share the same, and start having those conversations. So to your point of picking your battles, I can't agree with you more. I'm not going to battle every single thing that comes to the docket. I will address it, but I won't necessarily fight it. I will speak up and say, I don't think that's the right thing, but I value your opinion, and move off of it. And then I will take note of it and then create a bigger forum to where there's more of us that are feeling the same way, or we're seeing the same things happening to others that we need to take a stand for them because they might not have a voice. And so united voices is a powerful thing, and you don't have to take it on yourself. And by no means would I ever recommend that unless you're a major speaker. There are obviously advocates out there that have a louder voice. So find out who is the louder voice. I think also on the vein of allies or, partners, if you will, it's good to find others that have a voice and that you guys can take turns so that you're not always the loudest one in the room, to your point.
This is, Michelle, don't you agree? This is really important stuff.
It's very important. And I want to add an additional perspective on this that I think is worth calling out. So there is the voice of the folks that are the troublemakers that are always complaining and pointing out everything that's done wrong. And yes, I have observed different topics, but I've certainly fallen into that myself. What I think I've learned that's important is when you see things being done right, you have to celebrate and draw a lot of attention to that, because then you can be seen as an objective leader, influencer, change maker, because you are recognizing and noticing the good things and not just always a voice of putting everyone down and exposing everything that's wrong. So it builds a lot of trust and credibility in terms of how you lead and how you drive change.
And what's interesting with that is in listening to it is that you're definitely right. And I think at the time when I was shaking it up, there weren't as many good things.
Right.
I mean, really, yeah. There's been enough progress, so you're not the lone voice. And I like this idea of these alliances to do that, because otherwise, this was the word that was used when I was doing my task force on women and minorities. Someone went to the managing editor and said, she's causing an insurrection in the newsroom. And
Wow.
Right.
Well, fun.
Well, you know, and I didn't mind that. I just didn't realize that when you do something that threatening, it becomes their job to kill you. And I think now companies do realize that it's not just the right thing, it's also the right thing for business. And so that when the case is made that way, then they got on board. And the other thing is you're choosing to wear your label on your sleeve, which is something some people don't understand, right? It's like when they talk about gay people, it's like, why do they have to tell people they're gay? But you want people to know and discuss that of why you want people to know and what that does for others.
Well, I mean, it's not like I go down the street saying, "Hey, I'm Latina," but I do.
But
yes,
it's on your profile.
Yes, it is on my profile. But for me, it's important because it sets an example that you should be proud of whoever you are, wherever you are, and we all should be proud of that. And it creates that diversity, right? Because if we hide in the closet of who we are, what's the point? We're all going to try to be the same way. So there is such beauty in diversity as a whole, and there's multiple facets of diversity, right? Whether it's gender, I mean, diversity of thought. Most people forget to even talk about that, right? Seeing things differently because of experiences you have. So you can leave the ethnic or the gender aside for that conversation because it goes much wider and deeper. So, and I think that's what makes this world so amazing, to have those different perspectives and to bring your best to the table. So for me, my best is the fact that I was raised in a bicultural environment growing up, meaning like I am 100% Argentine, but I had the beauty that my parents, spoke different languages and learned different cultures and would bring them home. And so I provide a different perspective, just like you do, each one of you on the call today. So, and I think that's beauty. I mean, Michelle and I have had many conversations where she's helped me see things in a different light. And it just opens your eyes to, I mean, we would be in such a better place as a world, more peaceful if we had a little bit more empathy and understanding for others and their backgrounds. So why not, wear it on your sleeve? At the same time, I will say, there is a certain level of uncomfort for me of putting labels on people. Like I speak up and say that I'm Latina, but at the same time, internally, I'm challenged because I'm like, why should I have to tell people that I'm Latina? Like, what does it matter?
Mm-hmm.
So I get what you're saying. It shouldn't really matter, but I want others to feel safe that if they feel that there's something about them that they feel not understood, that they're able to speak up and walk in their authentic self. So, I mean, I think also one thing you said that's important, one other way of coming to the conversation, if you will, is by asking questions. And one of the things I've always advocated for is seek to understand, right? If we don't put that energy of trying to seek to understand the other person in front of us, then we can't expect the other person to do the same. So we're in an environment, for instance, if there is some type of discrimination, I think it's important to ask questions and not ask questions and to your point of in an aggressive way, but truly from that place of trying to understand and seeing where that communication disconnect. So even if I'm not Latina and I think in 2 languages and you think only in 1, there could be, misinterpretations along the way. So asking the questions and staying away from those assumptions that we've been programmed to put into our heads is so important. So having a voice can come across from just asking a question with the intent to understand.
It's powerful whenever you have that curiosity. Well, talk a little bit about, what's some good life advice that you have now, perspective you have now that you wish you would have known younger?
I love the question, but at the same time, I feel like everything happens for a reason. So had I known what I know now, in a way, I wouldn't have had that learning curve.
The learning. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that took me to where I am today. I would say more of what I had, in the sense of I wish I would have had more exposure to different cultures that I didn't have in the past, right? So the support system I had was internally in the sense of my family, but I wish I would have been able to meet more people outside of that would have given me a different perspective. But I don't regret anything. It's like I said, every single thing that I've known at that given moment has opened my eyes in a very unique way and helped me to become who I am today. So, and that goes across anything, both professionally and personally. I've made mistakes along the way, but those mistakes have been the ones that, have helped me take a new direction. So to your point, Fawn, I mean, I have been very good at inserting my foot in my mouth along the journey. So, it's not troublemaker. My intent wasn't there, but maybe I said something that I shouldn't have because I was trying to get my point across. But that's what helped me learn, maybe the method is ask the question. So asking the question and totally disarming the emotion is probably one that I could have done a better job along the journey and I continue to work at. It's when I see someone that I feel in that given moment does something from a place of malice, it turns a switch in me, like I have to prove that person, or I have to bring that person to a realization that they shouldn't be that way. But in essence, and even in just saying it out loud right now, I'm not really applying diversity of thought and accepting them for who they are at that point. So it's those unconscious biases. And I think that that's going to be a journey until my last day. We continue, it has to be a thing you practice and create that muscle, right? So you have to exercise it.
So your parents moved to Argentina before you were born, right? So what was their background? So
no, but I will tell you, Argentina is a melting pot. So I am, I think, second generation Italian, second generation Spanish. So my grandmother and my grandfather were fresh off the boat from different places in Europe. I am sixth generation Scottish on my mom's side, and we have a very strong Scottish heritage. That's why they spoke English, but with a Scottish accent at home. And, my family was one of the first Scottish settlers in Argentina. So there's a huge diversity in the sense of different places, different social classes. My family was from a working class. My mom's was from a more aristocratic. So, and ironically enough, my grandmother her husband left her with 3 kids in a time period what was unheard of to be divorced, right? So she became a social worker to help others. So the humility and the, I guess, core values of my life have definitely come from my grandmother. In learning to, ask the questions, to help others, and to really, how do we come together to make this a better place? Because it takes the village, as you women know very well. So those very strong values came from that immigration or, different generations of hardships.
It's really impressive to hear how that all came together, made you. You got so mission driven with your work and you've really dedicated yourself to that. A long time ago, someone made me feel better because I was hitting my head against the wall and said, sometimes you pave a road that you don't get to drive on. And so some of the battles you fight now, you aren't going to see the results instantly. What is the road that you are paving and where do you hope it'll lead?
I know that's very but,
This is not the Miss Universe contest.
No, I'm just kidding. I'm not kidding about peace, but I am kidding about world peace and Miss Universe. It's interesting because it's the same question when you're like, what are your goals over the next few years and what do you want to achieve? I am so focused in the today of what can I do different today and making a difference. I don't always know, Fawn, what that difference will mean or how it will manifest itself. And to me, my goal is really to give as much as I can and feel good about my day. That I somehow done something that's contributed but I don't know what that is. To your point, I don't know what that road looks like, number one, and I don't know what the contribution will be back, but I hope and pray that, women, men, whomever, children, elderly, will feel at peace internally to be able to be their authentic selves. And so I guess if that's the one contribution, I, focus obviously on the diversity and inclusion piece of it, because to me, it's very important. And it's been such an important road along the way. I have an 18-year-old son about to graduate, a Latino. He was born in Plano, Texas, but I consider him Latino. He also has he does have the part of the last name sounding Hispanic, Rochahaje. So, but he doesn't, he looks more Italian, I think, than anything. But, just him finding his voice and finding that pride of, you should be proud of who you are. And, things that you've lived, whether good, bad, or indifferent, they make you who you are. And so being able to embrace that unique threading of your DNA and who you are today, I think is such a fantastic thing.
Yeah, well, it's really inspiring because you're showing how you can be effective in your work, and you can also be devoted to social justice in a way that does make change. And I'm really loving your story.
She's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So I'll say, just on a personal note, knowing Carla, the things that she's been talking about now about authenticity and finding your voice. I mean, if I were to sum up every single conversation that she and I have, it always leads back to connecting with yourself and learning that, so you can find the strength to actually use it, honor it. And there were a few things I know, just Carla, that you said that really stuck out with me that I wanted to do a couple of recaps on. I think it was beautiful when you talked about you can be your most impactful with your authentic voice, and you need to know your values. So I think of our listeners, one of the life lessons is taking the time to connect with yourself and being able to figure out what that is, because you will have a much more beautiful life, both for yourself and for the good you can bring others. I thought it was also a great point when you talked about just you need to communicate in a way that your audience understands. So whether that's in business, working with a leader from another department, standing up for some injustice that you see, a social issue, that you've got to do it in a way they understand, and being thoughtful and considerate and curious about where they're coming from, because again, that's where you'll have a bigger impact. I thought it was also really great when you talked about being proud of who you are, because it will really help shine the light on the beauty that everyone has. And I'd close with appreciate all of life's experiences, because that's how you're going to learn and grow. And it's just been great spending this time with you. And I'm so glad you said yes to joining us today. I think there's a lot of wonderful nuggets that you're sharing with our audience.
And let's not forget the super nugget, which is there comes a point where you will see something and it is your moment to say, back up the truck.
Yes.
And that is a visual I want everybody to have in them, because it takes courage to say that. It is such an example of the time that it comes when you know inside of you something has been violated and you have to say, get back, Jack. So thank you so much, Carla, for being here with us. It's just
Thank you, ladies. And thank you for everything you're doing. I think, this forum raises a voice and gives a voice to many. So I applaud you as well for doing the same.
Well, thanks, Carla.
Thank you for joining the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast with best-selling author Von Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Join us weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network. Visit hardwonwisdom.com for more on this podcast and for links to Fawn and Michelle's web pages and social media. Also, be sure to rate, subscribe, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort, and we'll see you next week.